human right recognized in international law and essential to dignity, equality, and social cohesion. Yet today, as we've heard often in the lead up to this summit, nearly half of the world's population, almost 4 billion people, still live without any comprehensive form of social protection. That means no income support when they're sick, unemployed, pregnant or elderly, or no protection for children, for workers, or for those facing climate or other shocks. This isn't only unjust, it's inefficient and unsustainable. So the good news is I know that many of you, sometimes some of us, sometimes me, have been campaigning for stronger social protection systems. And even recently in the Compromiso de Sevilla on financing for development, the Pact for the Future, and this Second World Summit declaration, governments and global movements are clearly calling for stronger social protection systems, ones that are universal and rights-based, but also fairly financed through progressive taxation, where necessary through debt justice, and also greater international solidarity. So today's discussion will highlight how leadership is being shown by governments, the critical role of the ILO and the UN system, but perhaps more importantly, the vital energy of civil society, from grassroots organizations to global networks, those that are driving innovation and accountability. So together, let's use this space to move from commitment to concrete action, ensuring that universal social protection becomes a foundation for justice, resilience, and inclusion for generations to come. So with that, we're going to get going. I'd like to say at the beginning a big thank you to all of the partners who put their name to this event and who importantly and throughout the year obviously continue to do research, policy formation, advocacy with others on this important issue. This event is co-organized with the government of Tanzania, the ILO, USP 2030, alongside other partners including GCAP, APSP, GFOD, LDC Watch, SAFE, and the Global Coalition for Social Protection Laws. Just to get us going, and I'm going to have to be a little bit innovative on the order of speakers, and apologies for those who thought they might be speaking in a different place. But I wonder if I could start with Professor Soni Pallissery from NSLIU in India. Would that be okay, Soni?
Absolutely fine.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much. Obviously, we invite your intervention on the topic in any way you want to present it, but a prompt from my side would be, from your research, what policy innovations are emerging in South Asia, especially to reach informal workers and the households that find themselves living in the poorest circumstances? And secondly, what could global actors learn more from community-driven models in the region?
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. I am sitting in Bangalore, southern part of India. At the same time, I also will speak beyond this region where I am sitting, representing more South Asian experiences. To respond to Paul's question, also keeping in mind the theme of this panel, the financing universal social protection, I thought I'll take a few minutes to talk about 4 sectors. In each of them, we have very different kind of experience in terms of innovations and ability to universalize social protection. First one is a very positive story. That is the sector of construction workers. Construction workers is a sector where India has actually made a tremendous change in terms of coverage of social protection, because in terms of finance, government achieved very good outcomes, because government said construction, real estate is a booming industry, and all the building permits will be granted when a percent of the construction project finance is kept with the government fund. And that was a huge success, and government was able to quickly collect the finance required for it. However, the failure there was to disbursed to give the benefit to the workers. So finance or collecting the money was easier in a sector like construction, but difficult to reach out and to give the money to the people who are concerned. Let me take a very contrasting experience from another sector, which is domestic workers question. And across South Asia, the experience is almost same. Here, compared to construction workers, or where the money could be collected from a builder or one who is seeking the building permit, in domestic work question, you have many employers. A domestic worker goes to 5 houses, 6 houses, and therefore it's very difficult to identify and pinpoint one employer to from whom money could be collected. So collection of the money was finance was really very difficult one. But here is an area where innovation took place in terms of advancing the social rights, in terms of preventing the exploitation. Many organizations which mobilized the domestic workers and women, they were able to protect the women in terms of protecting their rights. Wherever abuse took place, violence took place, there was a collective of the women able to protect them. So another set of difficulty, but more difficulty with the finance, because the employers are really spread and they are spread across in different places. Now, let me take another positive experience, like the construction workers experience, but in an emerging sector of the gig workers. At least in 5 states, regional states in India, there is a law in place to give social security for the gig workers. Now, here finance has again become very easy, like the construction workers question. Why? The urban middle class who is in the cities, who is looking to get a cheap service in terms of delivery of the food or delivery of a good, they're ready to pay a extra small 1%, 2% service charge, and government is able to collect it through a technology or through an app or a system, and finance question is easily solved. The money easily comes from the middle class who is taking the service. However, the difficulty is when we look from the point of view of the 9 social security benefits of ILO, very few of them are met. The money that is collected, government largely spends on the accident insurance, lot of reluctance to advance the pension benefits, as well as reluctance to advance the uh, question of giving healthcare services. In addition to that, the biggest difficulty here is some of the states where there is already legislation, they have even gone against the basic principle of allowing the gig workers to organize themselves. So that is against the core labor codes or core labor principles, core labor standards, to say that workers can unite or workers can come together. And there we see a big reluctance. The employers or the app operators don't want the workers to come together. I will stop with the last experience, which is a negative experience and very shocking experience. That is the informal workers with the government itself. That is, the government employs a range of informal workers, largely in the bottom line or in the health delivery sector. And we find a lot of reluctance from the government to extend basically the minimum wage. Government on employees or who are on contract work or base level health delivery workers, they don't get the minimum wage. But a positive part there is they are able to get many other benefits like a life insurance, like a incentive based system for the hard work they are putting. But lack of minimum wage is a big problem in the government's own sector. So we see 4 different kind of a sectors, and we are seeing some innovations in the sector in this segment of construction workers and gig workers, but very little in the segments of domestic workers and the informal workers in the with the government itself. So that's where I will stop on the question on innovations and what has been done as models in South Asia.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'm going to ask a follow-up if you don't mind. But first, can I just ask, sometimes it's difficult for me to flip between the screens and see who we've got in person. If we have already the representative from the government of Tanzania, please could they just make themselves known to me by putting something in the chat so that everyone can see that we've got them. And the same also for Christina from ILO and Bina, just to let us know whether you're with us or not. I think Bina's strong, correct. But my follow-up question to you, if you don't mind, Tony, is on the one, it's a huge and challenging sectoral ecosystem of sort of examples where there could be innovation that you've laid out there, some positive, some negative. For the gig workers, which I mean, India is grappling with at the same time as many countries in Europe and North America. What do you see as the prospects for evolution from those 5 states which have started to make inroads into a fairer treatment for people who find themselves in the gig economy? Is this a movement? Is there knowledge about it? Is it growing across other states? That would be my question. Is there a progression? Is it moving forward?
I do see there is a progression. One important element is the electoral pressure that Indian democracy is putting, especially when you see one kind of a demand is met for a group of workers, then there is a demand for similar kind of a gig workers in another kind of, because gig service is in a variety of sectors such as food delivery, taxi drivers, services like cleaning. And currently the focus is on taxi drivers and the food delivery workers. Now, slowly, as the democratic process and the elections are catching up, there's a demand from other sectors. So there is an expansion to many other sectors which is happening. That is something which is very visible. Similarly, the effect on other states where this is not there. Other states are already saying, you see, in the other state, this is happening. Why not here? So we are seeing in terms of expansion, there is quite a lot of progression taking place. But if we ask the question on, is there a qualitative improvement for the benefits or the expanding the rights, we are not seeing much progression. Especially, as I said, we are seeing in some states where there is already a legislation, the violation of the core labor standards. And we don't see much progression taking place. We see much more hardening of that space happening. Some of the employers have taken a position that you are already getting benefits. Now you can't organize and demand more. So we see a very ameliorative kind of a system of benefits being given out, and therefore core labor standards or their social rights being violated and taken away. So we see the movement in both sides. That is, in other words, the thin nature of the welfare is getting spread. That's the change that we are seeing, progression. But the thick nature or the deepening nature of the quality of the benefits, we are not seeing much progression.
Got it. Thank you very much. That's a very helpful clarification. So maybe we can jump, if you like, from the micro to the macro. And Isabel, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn to you next. And again, with an open invitation to make the points that you want to make, but also perhaps also to comment on how the increased momentum behind, I would say momentum behind global taxation and possibly also behind wealth taxes in some countries, and also debt justice could unlock fiscal space for social investment, including in social protection. Whether you see true movement there or how long you think it would take to materialize. And then what role can global movements and civil society play to turn the commitments that you can find in summit outcome declarations, whether it's here in Doha or in Sevilla or in the Pact for the Future? How can we actually use those to translate those into real commitments made individually and collectively by governments?
Thank you very much, Paul. And it is a real honor to be here at the Social Summit today with you. So now it's a bit odd because I was supposed to be the last presenter after all of them will have presented the wonderful progress that there has been in universal social protection. We find countries with universal schemes in countries in all continents. Let me just, I have a long list here, but I'm sure that Christina Berendt and my colleagues will have explained that better, but Bolivia, Botswana, Brazil, Cabo Verde, Chile, China, Guyana, India, Lesotho, Maldives, Mauritius, Mongolia, Namibia, Nepal, South Africa, Zanzibar, Thailand, Timor-Leste, Trinidad, Tobago, just to say a few. There are many more. They have achieved universal schemes. But as Sony was saying, now it's not such an easy moment. And we are finding also obstacles. And you allow me, because an image is better than 1,000 words, I would like to share screen and show you a bit. Sorry, it's not this. Yes, here, share. I think you need to allow me to share screen.
Pragati, can you make her
yeah,
host?
yeah, can you tell me the name? Actually, I cannot find it out.
Isabel Ortiz.
Isabel.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyway, so I continue explaining it while you do it. Not yet. So, okay. No, not yet.
Yeah,
Well,
done.
Thank you very much. Okay, now you should be saying this. So what happens? Can you see this? So
Yes.
what you have here in red color are the countries that are actually contracting public spending in 2022 to 24. This is just now. And as you can see, the whole world is on fire. Reality is a large number of the countries of the world are told, mostly by Washington-based institutions like the IMF and the banks, to actually cut public spending and try to contain it. And however, we're going to see later that this is not necessary. Instead of having very minor states, what we can do, we have many solutions to actually expand and have a big budget to invest in universal social protection, as well as in many other human rights. While countries are told so, the impact on inequality, this is increasing inequalities. And that was the connection I was supposed to do in this presentation. And what you have here is the distribution of world income. At the very top, you have the richest 20%, and at the bottom, the poorest 20%. And in the middle, you have the other quintals. The poor in the world are about 40%. And as you can see, the world income has the shape of a glass of champagne. It's a bit all concentrated on the very top, on the elites. And today at the G20, they came with new numbers, and 40% of world income is just owned by the 1% on top, okay? So to see if it gets bad, the distribution of world income. Now, all these measures that are come with austerity reforms, from pension and social security reforms, cut and privatization of public services, cuts targeting social assistance, lower wages, increasing VAT, or cutting subsidy, all of them are squeezing the working and middle classes. They're making them with less income. And these are really pro-rich policies, and certainly not benefiting the majority of citizens in a country. And these international organizations, then they argue that a safety net for the poor, targeted to the poor, which will be the little yellow fraction at the bottom, it will be sufficient to mitigate, worse social impacts. But this is not correct, because they are very detrimental, or these reforms are squeezing the working middle classes, and they are detrimental to the majority of society. So what we need, as this summit is discussing solutions are not going to come from little interventions. This is, this may be valid things, give computers to the poor, things like that. The big solution is going to come through tackling the big problem of wealth accumulated at the very top, at the elites. And this is something that we need for social development and human rights to progress. And we're going to see that it is possible and feasible. So all this is leading to increasing number of protests and social conflict. And we can predict that more social conflict is going to come if these reforms continue. But all to say that all the suffering that these reforms are causing is completely unnecessary, because they're financing options for universal social protection and for other human rights. Even in the poorest countries, there are 9 options, available to all countries, and these are fully endorsed by the international financial organizations and by the UN. So we're not talking, also these measures that we're going to explain now, the nine options, they are they're not just ideas, abstract ideas. They're happening now. They have been happening for decades in many countries, so they are feasible. The first option will be to increase progressive tax revenues, like Paul was mentioning. So we have many cases here about the whole issues to avoid regressive taxation, like VAT, and focus on others, like it could be wealth taxes, which are at the moment announced by Iceland and Spain, taxing windfall profits in the energy sector, and we have that in Algeria, Angola, Australia, Canada, Kazakhstan, Italy, Mauritania, Mozambique, Norway, Papua New Guinea. And I'm mentioning all these long lists so you realize this is not an abstract idea. This is happening now, and it can happen in all your countries if it's not happening already. Then another option would be to tax digital services, like the sellers that they sell online. And we have that in Belgium, Canada, France, Indonesia, Kenya, New Zealand, Tunisia. We can also finance financial transactions, though the examples that existed, they were implemented by 2 progressive governments in Argentina and Brazil, but they were withdrawn by later conservative governments. But however, Hungary and Spain are implementing new taxes to banks' windfall profits since the pandemic. And then mining and gas taxes are very, very common all around the world. And we have them in many developing countries. And let me give you just one example, Mongolia. Mongolia is financing a universal child benefit to all children, just with a little tax on copper exports. So it is feasible and doable. The second option will be to fight illicit financial flows, because these are illegal, as the name says, and they must be changed, they may be combated. And this refers to bribery, tax evasion, trade mispricing, and other financial crimes that they were denounced in Sevilla and the Compromiso and others. Third option will be to eliminate or restructure debt. And here there are many options, from debt relief like HIPIC to debt renegotiation that more than 60 countries have done in recent years, debt swaps or conversions, repudiating debt, defaulting. More than 20 countries have defaulted, and some have invested the savings on social development, like Ecuador, Iceland, and Iraq. And what is clear, we need a better international debt resolution mechanism and more debt cancellation, obviously. And that was discussed in Sevilla, and unfortunately, the agenda is unfinished. So it's a lot more that needs to be done there. For social protection, because we're talking this topic, a fourth option, which is very important, it will be to increase social security contributions, like Sony was explaining. And here, there are many avenues to do that. Sony explains some, but overall, what we do need is that, to ensure that employers do pay adequate employers' contributions, which in many countries, they have been waived since the pandemic, because as a kind of way to incentivize the economy, and also formalize the workers in the informal economy, or what Sony was very, very well explaining. And we have very good examples in many sectors and in many countries. And fifth option will be to reallocate public spending, ideally to move away from defense and military and other expenditures that have no social benefits, and invest more in health, education, and social protection. And we have very good examples earlier in history, like Costa Rica and Thailand. They both use military spending for health. However, these times are difficult times, as Sony was saying, and we are seeing an increase in defense spending in many countries. There are 6 options, will be to tap into fiscal and foreign exchange reserves, 7, to have more accommodative macroeconomic frameworks, 8, to lobby for more aid, though we know that aid is decreasing massively. And 9th is an international option that will be to have new SDR allocations at the IMF. That will be the special drawing rights, but they will have to be without debt, creating debt and without conditions. And there has been a first tranche done, but more tranches could be negotiated. Now, countries, how they do that, the key thing is not to have very limited space for universal social protection, education, health, and other human rights. The key is keep increasing slightly from a number of these options that we have been measuring, and just so your pocket, your budget, instead of becoming small, becomes bigger, and you can actually continue expanding coverage and benefits. And that is, many countries have done it before, and hopefully many countries are going to continue doing it. And Paul also asked what civil society can do. Well, very clearly, what happens is that currently these decisions about spending and revenue rising are actually done behind closed doors at the Ministry of Finance by a few technocrats, very often with the advice of the international organizations like the IMF or the banks. This is wrong, bad governance. This should not happen, behind closed doors. These decisions affect the lives of millions of people, and they need to be done in national social dialogue, which is what the international conventions put as good governance policy. So this is where civil society can intervene. There will be a national dialogue with representative unions, federated employers, and CSOs, and the government, obviously. And you can call UN agencies in countries. They might help to do the analysis and the reports. And with all that, discuss the budget publicly and the financing sources to see, which will be the optimal solution for that country. And that it is indeed the way forward. Thank you very much. I hope we have some questions and answers later. Yep.
Thank you very much, Isabel. That was incredible, very comprehensive, and very clear. Thank you. I'm going to come back to you with a question of my own, with the attempt to be slightly provocative in a minute as well. But before I do that, I'd just like to once again check whether I can. I see Veronica is online, but I don't know whether that means the ILO is ready to intervene, because we did have a promise from Christina Berendt earlier that she would join us and speak, but I don't know if, Veronica, you're in a position to do that. I certainly don't want to put you on the spot. So just to ask whether that would be the case. It would be my intention, if not, to go to Sylvia Beals, who's representing the Grey Panthers, after you, Isabel, and then finish with Vina, and then we'll take some questions from the floor. Veronica, if you can confirm in the chat, so that would be very helpful. But my question to you is, Isabel, so the short story is the world is on fire for lots of reasons. An absolute failure to recover from the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009 in most countries, subsequent crashes and crises associated with COVID, but also conflict driving the cost of energy and food up. And one suspects that government's desirability to innovate on fiscal policy, including in the many examples which are positive that you set out, are because of this very tough space that they find themselves in. And there's a comprehensive agenda that we can work with there. One of the, if you like, press takeaways from the G20 report this morning was about how inheritance was set to amplify inequalities in the next 2 to 3 decades. And it's quite important, I think, particularly from the campaigning and advocacy side, because when we talk about financing social protection and we talk about intergenerational approaches and equity for both younger persons and also older persons. And so I wondered what your particular point of view on inheritance taxes was in the context of intergenerational equity in financing social protection systems.
Yes, you're completely right. Actually, it should be in the list. The list is much longer. I mean, I could add many more, but it's because, you know, you have limited time. And but you're right, inheritance should be there, and it makes a lot of sense from the point of view of fighting inequality, and obviously the intergenerational solidarity. It is actually, I'm realizing, it is there. It is just what's in the narrative and not with examples. So. And there are others too, like it could be different types of corporate taxation that I did not even mention, and that should be expanded more, etc. The whole issue is to make people realize that it's a long list of options, and when governments very often are cornered and they're told, no, you don't have fiscal space for for whatever spending the government might want to do. This is not really correct. The country needs to sit down, and the government think twice, call for national dialogue, and rethink things a bit longer instead of rushing to take some fiscal adjustment very quickly because of pressures very often now with creditors, because of the debt situation of countries. So all that needs to be done a little bit slower. It took it impacts the lives of millions of people, so it cannot just be done so rushed.
Great, thank you very much then for clarifying, Isabel. I think Veronica's indicated that she may chip in later, but certainly hadn't planned to step in for Christina, which is completely understandable. So in that case, then I'm going to turn, we're also still waiting to see if our representative from the government of Tanzania has been able to join us, but in the meantime, I'm going to turn to someone who's actually sitting on my right in the room, Sylvia Beals from the Grey Panthers, to really expand on this framing and approach of making sure, as I said just now, that both people of all ages, but especially younger people and older people, can be ensured dignity through social protection, including through the financing of those systems. So my question to you, Sylvia, would be, how can intergenerational approaches ensure that sustainability and dignity for people of all ages? And can you share an example where intergenerational solidarity has influenced social protection design or financing in a particular country?
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, I'm sitting next to him on this sofa at this World Social Summit. We're very happy to have this session, and thank you all for coming, and thanks to all the great speakers before me, and hopefully the ILO will be able to come in. I want to acknowledge the ILO in particular, because in my work on aging, the ILO has always been a fantastic partner, both at national level and at global level, to help put a spotlight, if you like, on a population group which is not only growing, but a group to which we are all becoming, we are becoming one of. And so I guess the obvious point to make is that all of us are aging. It's not something we are going to escape from unless we get very sick or have a sudden accident. We all want our aging to be dignified, secure, in full acknowledgement of our rights to health, decent housing, participation, and independence. And these are things which are guaranteed under the International Charter of Human Rights. But aging is often forgotten or cast in many policy terms as a burden for governments. Why? Because people think that people who are older do not contribute to the economy, are not productive, are basically a burden. And there's a term which older people themselves use called internalized ageism, that they are less important than the younger generation. So I guess a key message is for all of us, to the younger generation and to ourselves, is that we're in this together. And as we age together with those coming up behind the younger generation. And we in the aging community have therefore emphasized the importance of intergenerational partnerships and learning, and pensions is a particular case in point. These days, as Isabel has illustrated, austerity is on the rise, inequality is on the rise. Young people don't necessarily see the need to put aside a future which is supported by a pension. And I am of a generation where pensions were given. I'm of a country where pensions were given. But most of the world does not have this privilege. So the ILO standard 202 of social protection floors is a really transformative standard. It's a recommendation. It's not a convention. And we talked long and hard with the ILO people about making it a convention, but governments weren't ready for it. But it is a recommendation that all people of whatever country, whatever background, class, caste, ethnicity, have the right to health, have the right to an income in childhood, in maternity, and when you're unemployed, and when you are older. We have put in the People's Declaration for Social Justice of the Global People's Assembly a particular call for the social protection floor to be fully recognized and fully financed. Why? Because it is a standard that reaches across generations. And if it were implemented, and it is not implemented, it would reach older people and those who depend on them across the world. So that's one point. Do we know we all have the right to those provisions under the recommendation? I want to point out also to those on the call that the declaration currently being looked at to be agreed by this assembly, it does recognize social protection and the social protection floor as essential to achieve the world of harmony, well-being, prosperity that we want. But half the world does not get these benefits. And Recommendation 202 was agreed in 2012. With the ILO, we started to work on this in the aging community way back in 2006, in fact, when we came up with the idea with the African Union of the minimum package. This was, in a way, translated into the standard. So why is this? Why can't aging be incorporated into the policy speak of our world? Perhaps we're all afraid of getting older. Perhaps we have internalized our own ageism. So what we want to do with the youth, if you like, is walk together to this world of equal rights throughout the life course. And one of the issues that the community of aging is very, pleased and anxious to push forward is the Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. Because even though aging, along with climate change, is probably the biggest, issue affecting the world in all regions, there is no mechanism to protect our rights. And we need that. Every other community has those mechanisms. So what Pradeep is putting up on the screen right now, I think, he's putting up the, well, I'm going to read it. It's 3.7 of our declaration. So we're asking the summit to call for the adoption of a UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons and their inclusion in social protection, data, services, local and national consultations, and participatory processes. And as a global standard for social protection, pensions in whatever country must be sufficient to cover needs in old age, so that older persons, if they do not wish to, they do not have to work. I want to just point out, though, in terms of the question that Paul asked me to answer about an example, the biggest example of obvious example of support for older people to the younger generation is that of grandparent care, which is not resourced or recognized. And often the grandparents provide the means for the younger generation to make the living which they need to support the family, backed up by whatever tiny pension they get. So you probably know there's many, there are many examples which actually came out initially from South Africa, that the pension held by the grandparent supports the children, the grandchildren, and enables them to grow well and be educated and have good nutrition. And indeed, in Spain, some years ago, when the grandparents went on strike, the whole country fell apart. So, you know, I think we need to recognize there are many ways in which there are connections, but let's see them, let's see those connections, and in financial terms, support them through policy and dedicated subsidies, if that is possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. It struck me as you were talking that, you know, as you would expect, it's intuitive that the intergenerational dynamics are going to be very, very different in each country. I do know the case of South Africa quite a bit and know how important pensions received by South African grandparents are to very, very extended families and what they want to achieve or what they can achieve. And then also, of course, in some countries in Western Europe and soon in Eastern Europe, you're going to be seeing such fast demographic change and aging that younger populations in the workforce, unless policy is adapted in some way, are going to face quite a large fiscal burden as well. So it's clear that we need, in a way, to map the rights-based, fair and just aspiration to equal rights throughout the life course to financing systems in each country, and it would have to be an individual exercise constructed by different stakeholders with knowledge of fiscal policy to actually turn that aspiration into reality. But I'll leave that open, and of course you can come back and comment on that as well in a minute too. But I'm going to, in the absence from hearing from Tanzania, I'm now going to turn to who may be our final speaker, Vina Palalikal from GCAP, who's going to, I think, reflect on innovative and ethical financing towards a global fund for the most marginal. And my question to you, Vina, is that you've championed equity-based financing. How do you think, and we've clearly talked also about global funds for social protection in the past as well. How do you think a global fund for the most marginalized would operate in practice? Like which instruments could or would it draw from Isabel's list? And fundamentally, what are the ethical principles that would underpin such a global mechanism to avoid reproducing inequality in the future? if it's possible for you to address those, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I'm also, I think, sitting somewhere around the corner from where all of you are, and it's pretty noisy here, so please excuse that. So just to quickly first answer your question, that what would it require for, to be able to give social protection to, let's just take India as an example. We were about 1.2 billion people. About 25% of that population is from the marginalized. If you look just as not minority, but if you look just at Dalits and the indigenous population, that's a huge number. So it's about 160 million, just Dalits, and maybe another 100 million, maybe around 250, 300 million of that population is from the marginalized population. So that means that we need a huge amount of funding to be able to give social protection or some kind of program or scheme to ensure. We all saw during COVID how millions of people were walking when there was a complete shutdown by the government. Now, the shutdown probably was necessary for curbing COVID, but the fact of the matter is there were no mechanisms in place. And one of the mechanisms that we thought would be in place is that there was some provision of social security for the communities who are from the marginalized, who've lost their jobs. There was some support, but nothing of that came. So people actually walked from Delhi to Bombay to other major cities to their homes and towns, and they couldn't even last one day, not even one day when the shutdown happened, because they had no social security, neither private nor from the employers nor from the government. So I think that it is really important that was one classic example of how, if there was a social security, and we had done a lot of interviews and met a lot of migrant population who are mostly from the lower caste in India. And one of the things that they said, that if they did have, and there are two aspects to this. One is that if they did have that, they could still manage 3 to 6 months. But the other aspect is that none of them wanted to go to the hospitals, because if they were to go to the hospitals when they felt sick, what would happen is then their out-of-pocket expenses would really increase, and they didn't have the money to spend, but B, they thought that why should we go to the hospital if we're going to end up spending a lot of money. So this, I think, is really important to look at when we are, for any kind of fund, whether it's the loss and damage fund for the climate change, whether it is the funds that are coming in from other development banks. It's important to ensure that the issues of the most marginalized are taken and centered around when policies around this is being made. I think it's also important to have a leadership from these communities at the table while framing these policies. I think it's really important, because it's not, it's okay for everybody to sit in a room and just make this policy without taking the ground realities into effect. So I think that is really important to look at, considering that this is also a very large population. So I'm sure that, there are many programs in India that work well, but some of these programs for the marginalized really take on and are not implemented well. So I think that is one thing that we really need to do. The other question that you've asked is, what are those principles that we need to keep in place? I think one is principle of non-discrimination, because many times we have seen that even if the programs are there, even if the schemes are there, for the communities to access it becomes very difficult, which means there are barriers of accessing the schemes. Women who are pregnant, when they go to hospitals and when they know government hospitals, and when they know that they're from the Dalit community, they make them clean we have had cases where they're supposed to clean the room before they enter and after and when the day they're leaving. Things like that. Doctors will not treat. There these ASHA workers who are workers who go to houses to give immunization or vaccine. They will not go knowing that there's a family. So I think non-discrimination is one main principle that they have to keep in mind while drafting or framing these policies. The policies have to be inclusive, and the budget has to be proportionate to the population to be able to address. Or if we were to say 16.6% now is the total population of just Dalits. So 16.66% of the total budget of the health ministry should be for schemes and programs for communities who are from the Dalit community, and now at the UN level, they're known as communities discriminated on work and descent. And my last thing would be that in governance, we have seen that while there might be programs, there might be good schemes, there might be good laws and policies, the implementation of it, or people who are wanting to implement it, will not implement because it's not in their interest to implement. So how do we have sensitization workshops? How do we ensure that there is an aspect of inclusion and sensitization with the groups that are implementing, or with the offices that are implementing these policies, so that they actually reach the ground? So it is important that we look at the last mile connectivity of these programs, so that we are able to give them a social security that they're able to, take forward. And this goes with other intersectionalities as well, the trans community within these communities, people with disabilities within these communities. I think further we should also look at it as different intersectionalities. So inclusive, non-discriminatory, and intersectional. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Nina. That was, again, very, very clear. Thank you. I'm going to open the floor in a moment for comments from participants. I understand that, again, without wishing to put you on the spot, Veronica, but I understand you may be willing to come in and just offer a couple of reflections on the interventions that we've had so far. Would that be okay?
Yes, I'd love to. And sincere apologies from the ILO side that there seems to have been a hiccup and misunderstanding between Shara, Christina, and myself on who would speak at this event. I'm very sorry about that. Yes, so I think we've heard a very broad range of issues mentioned already that speak, I think, to three necessary conditions that we need to really make the case for universal social protection, for really a push to social development. That is, of course, the topic of the summit, which is we need to ensure a sound political will, political feasibility. We need sound financing, financial feasibility, and we need, and I think this was very much the last intervention, we need technical feasibility in the sense of we need a delivery system that really delivers to the people and that is accessible. And without effective access, even the political will and the financing doesn't do the job if people then if the benefits then don't reach the people in a way. And at the ILO, we work on all three of these. We, most importantly, for the political and legal frameworks, we set social security standards, of course, and a recommendation 202 was mentioned. We make the normative case, and we lay down many principles of a minimum outcome that social protection systems need to deliver to the people in terms of income security and access to healthcare along the life cycle, but also in terms of process, how this social protection is delivered, in terms of solidarity and financing, in terms of sound financial management, but also in terms of people. They should contribute in line with their contributory capacity, but they should be able to access in line with their needs. And that requires, I mean, it also speaks to solidarity, and it requires a line of other principles that were mentioned, like non-discrimination, like equality of treatment before the law, etc., etc. I don't want to go into the details, but there's a long list of 13 principles and recommendations for 2, all of which are very important to deliver on the promise of leaving no one behind. In terms of the investment case, Isabel Otis also mentioned the handbook that was jointly done when Isabel was with us at the ILO, and that provides all the information about the different options that countries have. And this is really, next to the normative case of our standards, it's important to also remind people who are not convinced by the ethical argument that there's also an investment case or an economic argument. social protection systems act as stabilizers, as automatic stabilizers of aggregate demand in times of economic crisis. The investment in social protection generates economic multipliers, most of the times larger than one. So there's really benefits at the macro level, but also at the micro level. They encourage entrepreneurship and risk-taking. At the meso level, businesses benefit from more productive and healthier workers. So there's a strong case also on that end to invest in social protection and social protection floors. And the ILO does a lot of work also on financing on estimating the financing gap to lobby for more investments in social protection with adequate benefits, with comprehensive protection for all. I mean, the ILO is custodian of SDG 1.3.1 and monitoring progress. Yes, there has been some progress in coverage extension. Unfortunately, there's no indicator that measures the adequacy of with which people are covered. And even if now we have, for the first time in history, more than half of the population benefiting from at least one social protection benefit, this is still a far cry from the comprehensive protection across the life cycle that we actually would want to see. And also, I mean, let's wait until the next data comes out, because my suspicion would be that there is a corona effect in this increase in social protection. And some of that coverage extension, I believe, maybe was not sustained afterwards. So we will have to wait whether this is really a sustainable increase in coverage. And this is not to underestimate the strong efforts that countries have been undertaking in improving their social protection systems, but a lot still remains to be done. And this is, I mean, I think this whole financing, I think I really love the graph that you had, Isabel, because it shows so clearly how we're really failing to organize solidarity on a society level. We are now having perverse tax and distribution systems that distribute from the lower and middle income to the rich. And this, historically, we know that this was not the case. Up until the around 60s, there was actually systems in place that were progressive and that did redistribute from the top to the bottom. And now the maximum that we can have is from the middle to the bottom. But both of the middle and the bottom redistribute to the top, and this is something that yeah, I think we need to make much more noise on, and also where very valuable work on the UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation is important, because with globalization, countries also started to compete with their tax regimes. And it is very difficult at the national level, I think, to make changes to your tax system if you know other countries have then a competitive advantage, because they organize their tax structures differently. And so even though taxation is a national prerogative of a sovereign nation state, it seems like you can't actually set within your own national government's tax systems in the way you like if other countries go for drastically different decisions in their tax structuring. And yeah, yes, I mean, Isabel went through all the options. I don't want to repeat them. You've also talked about Sevilla. The ILO pushed for this 2 percentage point increase per year as a minimum. I know that civil society thought this was lacking ambition. It was based on past experience of countries that 42 countries that have been able, middle and low income countries that were able to achieve that extension. A lot of them extended by much more than these 2 percentage points. That's true. And of course, this is a minimum. And I think it's for us to push countries to develop their national social protection strategies that set concrete time-bound targets, milestones that measure progress, and that encourages countries to really plan for their extension gradually in terms of benefit adequacy, comprehensiveness of risks covered, and people that are reached. And I think having these planning tools, and also in the follow-up to this summit, to really track progress is a really key aspect of moving things forward. So sorry, I was a bit all over the place because I didn't really prepare for this, but yeah, thanks a lot.
That was excellent, Veronica. Thank you very much for stepping in, but it was also very clear and comprehensive as well. I'm just going to offer a chance for other participants to raise their hand to see if they would like to ask a question. And in the absence of that, and because we have fewer speakers, then I'm going to try to draw a couple of lines through the presentations that we've heard for some takeaway points that we can record because we've had this meeting. I mean, I think the first point, and it's very simple, but it really needs to be made, is that we're halfway through a rights-based job of making sure that everybody in the world has the social protection that they need and deserve. And so when we're at a potentially important international conference like this one being held in Doha, the fundamental point right at the beginning is the need, once again, to stress the importance of universal rights-based social protection systems for everyone in the world, irrespective of who they are or where they live. And we don't want to lose that point. There have been many prior political commitments that have been made. There have been evolutions and there has been progress, as we've heard, particularly from Sony at the beginning, and I'm sure we could have heard from others about positive examples of social protection expansion too. Yet there are still very huge gaps. And so that is a fundamental point. We've still got a very much an unfinished job and new challenges, including the one that Sony talked about in terms of gig workers, not just for India, but in all other countries too. Secondly, this need for social protection systems that are stronger, that offer floors, that are rights-based, universal, is not going away anytime soon. Isabel talked about a world on fire. I think fiscally was her lens, but the world is also on fire. The world is on fire politically. The world is on fire because of rapid technological change, because of increasing climate and weather shocks, because of the potential for economic shocks in the near future, for the potential for actually the conflicts that we've seen spreading through greater geopolitical unrest, a world that's becoming more insecure and more in need of systems that will protect people when they hit hardship. So that's the second point. We're entering an era of increasing shocks and volatility where we need to be more resilient, and stronger social protection systems are going to be a part of that. Third, I think we heard very strongly from Isabel, but also from others, that there are options on the table which will be country specific and which will need global coordination, as Veronica pointed out on some, for filling that financing gap, for investments across the board, but also in social protection systems. And they range through the macro ones on debt and coordinated international policy on cross-border corporates, but then also opportunities at the national level to review old and rusty fiscal systems that are no longer fit for purpose and to make sure that they're more progressive. The simple thing to say there is that it's going to be very, very country specific, but with national support. And there's a common core. And then lastly, in the delivery of social protection, but also in the financing of social protection, there are aspects of equity that we can't let escape us. One of them is an intergenerational aspect, so that we have equal rights throughout the life course, as Sylvia said. But then, as Bina also emphasized, it's not just intergenerational rights, it's also the full panoply of intersectionality that comes into play in terms of people's characteristics and the circumstances that they face and where they come from. So in terms of their gender, whether they live with a disability, whether they live in a rural area, their race, their ethnicity, all of these factors will come into play in determining whether you have a properly rights-based, justice-based social protection system that is also financed in a way that protects those rights of all those who need to benefit from it. So those would be my four takeaways from the meeting. I hope I've been able to knit together some of the very important and interesting contributions that the panelists have made. Apologies that we were not able to be joined by representatives also from government, who I think would have added an extra flavour to the meeting, but I think at another opportunity we'll try to do that with a bit more vigour in the same setting with some of the same questions that we can resolve more fully with their presence. So with that, and unless I turn to my colleagues who would like to ask them if they would like to come in and say something else, and Sylvia would like to add something, and then I offer the opportunity also to close the meeting.
Okay, am I on? Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. As everybody has said, there has been progress, but there's also, I think we should be really conscious of how difficult it is. I mean, I started with the social protection floor idea, as I said, way back, beginning of the 2000s, from the point of view of older people in the global south getting a bit of income to supplement themselves and their grandchildren. And this is now a standard, which is in the SDGs, but it is unfilled. It is not happening. And we have to ask our governments why it is not happening and why welfare, so-called, is still a bad word, and austerity policies roll back the rights which we all have. So I think it's a struggle. We have to recognize, and we have to hold hands, if you like, link arms generationally, to make sure that the rights which are so hard won over many years, way back in Copenhagen, aging was the first time it was mentioned, for example, and then we got the Madrid Plan of Action and so on, and disability was also mentioned for the first time then, etc. But things do not happen unless we organize. So I would like to see us all from this meeting, the World Social Summit, really not let any slippage on the social protection agenda from now on and make it a universal one, because it isn't universal yet. And I want to thank everybody for coming. GCAP is really delighted to have got its declaration done, and which social protection played a major role. And I would like to thank from GCAP, because we don't have Ingo, who would have done it, because he's not very well. I would like to thank Paul for moderating so wonderfully, and everybody for their speaking. And let's go forward, strength to strength. Unity is strength, as we always used to say. So thank you very much from me to everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Bina,
you.
Sylvia,
Thank
Veronica,
you.
Sonny, Paul, everybody. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Finish? Still on. How do I get rid of it? Leave. Oh.